This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Sudan to promote stronger ties with Israel. The World Health Organization declares Africa free from wild polio. And concerned that the coronavirus may spread in water-stressed rural communities in Kenya. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with your business headlines is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Kenya's mobile service telecommunications provider Safaricom has $5 million to invest in tech startups. And Egypt's housing industry, will it rebound after the economic damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll be exploring that and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you, Rama. We will see you in a bit. Let's start with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit in Sudan, where he met with Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok earlier on today. Pompeo is in Sudan for an official visit. Sudan is currently listed by the U.S. as a state sponsor of terrorism. During their meeting, the Sudanese Prime Minister discussed removing his country from Washington's terrorism list. The two sides also discussed Sudan's deepening relations with Israel. Pompeo has been on a regional tour following the UAE and Israel signing that accord to open diplomatic relations. He landed in Sudan from Israel in what he said was the first official non-stop flight between the two nations. Pompeo is set to visit Bahrain and the UAE next. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Patrick Oyet, who is in neighboring South Sudan. Patrick, there are reports saying that Sudan's prime minister described his meeting with Pompeo as great, and he also tweeted that they had a direct and transparent conversation regarding delisting Sudan of hashtag SSLTL, which is the state sponsors of terrorism list. Patrick, should Sudan be removed from Washington's terrorism list, what would that mean for that country?
Hannah, removing Sudan from the state sponsor of terrorism list would mean a lot for Sudan. Number one, of course, that it would make Sudan able to borrow money from financial institutions, international financial institutions such as the World Bank, such as the International Monetary Fund, which money Sudan desperately needs. If you remember, the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir last year took place because the whole problem started with a problem of economic difficulty. Prices of bread had gone up, price of fuel had gone up, and people went to the streets to protest. So the economic situation in the Sudan is not good. Sudan is also depending on oil. Oil price is down, so the economy is not doing good. Sudan needs money, but because of the sanctions, they cannot get money from international financial institutions. Therefore, removing them from the list would help in that regard. Not only that, there is also the issue of foreign direct investment. For decades now, since the sanctions in the early 1990s, Sudan has not been having this foreign direct investment, which would come to the country, provide, of course, employment opportunities, and also bring in some of the dollars that is needed. This is not happening. So once they are removed from the terrorism list, you will find that many countries from the West would actually invest in Sudan, and that would help the country. We've already seen American companies like Oracle. We've seen like Visa announcing that they would enter Sudan market. So it would help. Another thing is also that the Sudanese army is not now supported, especially by the West, because of the sanctions. So if that sanction is lifted, then support would also come for the army in terms of training, better equipment. So there's a long list of benefits that the Sudan could get as a result of getting out of the list. Also, just to relate freely with other countries, because now even
Patrick, I wanted to speak a little bit about Israel and the relationship with Sudan, because Prime Minister Hamdok was very clear in stating that this new step with the U.S., even though it is positive, does not automatically mean a normalizing of relations between Sudan and Israel. Patrick, how critical is the issue of relations between Israel and Sudan among the people of Sudan?
Yeah, this is a very complicated situation, because since Sudan got its independence in the 1950s, of course the people of the Sudan have been told that Israel is an enemy, and your friend is Palestine, or your brother is Palestine, and Israel is a problem. That's why in the Sudanese passport, someone who had Sudanese passports before, it is written that you can visit all countries except Israel. So that tells you of the magnitude of hatred that was towards Israel. So in fact, I am sure that even when the Secretary of State was going to Khartoum, he knew that it would not be an automatic thing that he would say, and the Sudanese authorities would say, yes, now we want to normalize the ties. It's a process, because for many years there has been that kind of enmity. So it is something that will take time, and I think that the Prime Minister's statement that they are not, or this government is not mandated to, to normalize ties with Israel is a little bit dishonest, because if the same government is mandated to normalize ties with the U.S., for example, then why would it not have the mandate to normalize ties with Israel? But he was speaking because of the hostility you would expect from the people of Sudan if indeed they move too fast to normalize ties with Israel. So it's still a challenge, and the government in the Sudan now is still trying to bring all factions in the Sudan together. For example, there's a peace process going on in South Sudan. Other groups are still jumping out of the ship of that peace process. So you would not want to bring in more issues that would again create more groups that would create more problems for the country. But many people say this is a process. America has already stated what it wants. Thank you.
Patrick, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for discussing that. We are going to broaden this discussion now. That was Patrick Yurt speaking to us from Sudan's neighbors, South Sudan. We're going to broaden this discussion now, where we're joined by Bassem Ali, an editor at Ahram Online. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just start with Sudan's Prime Minister saying that the government has no mandate to normalize Israel ties. What do you make of this? We heard from Patrick and his side. What do you make of that statement?
In fact, that makes perfect sense, especially that due to the fact that Sudan is currently governed by transitional authorities. And in fact, the way through which Sudan has managed to handle its transition so far has been complicated on many aspects. So I think there is no need to move forward or to put into the equation more problems. It's better to leave it to the authorities who will handle the country after the 3-year transitional period. And at this point of time, the Sudanese new ruling elites would be able to negotiate and move forward with a deal that they can discuss with the Americans and the international community as a whole.
Sudan is lobbying to be removed from the Washington's terrorism list, and it has been for quite a while. And now it's saying that the discussion that took place today was positive. We don't have any more information on that and what Washington's decision is just yet. But what has been the U.S.'s response up until now, and what is likely to happen in that regard?
For the Sudanese, they want their name to be removed from the terrorism list in order to open up economically to the world. They need to sign economic agreements and trade agreements with the Americans, with the Europeans, with everyone. And this cannot take place unless Sudan's name is removed from the American terrorism list. On the other hand, what has been reported by the media is that the Americans want a compensation for the 17 American citizens who have been killed by Al-Qaeda in previous years during the time in which its leader Osama bin Laden was hosted by the previous regime and in Sudan. Meanwhile, it seems that the Americans are very interested, and they're doing as much effort as possible in order to create some kind of rapprochement between Sudan and Israel. We've seen in the past weeks that the Arab-Israeli relations have seen some very interesting developments, including the Emirati-Israeli peace deal that has been sponsored by the Americans. And now it seems that the Americans are interested in achieving similar results with other Arab countries, including Sudan. So that definitely would be part of the discussion between the Sudanese side and the American side, it would be very important to see how would both sides negotiate it in the coming period of time. Of course, the Sudanese authorities, Prime Minister Hamdouk has said that he cannot take a final decision and he is not assigned to finalize a deal. But definitely, the coming years, maximum within the five-year period of time, we will see some very fruitful outcomes taking place out of these negotiations that are currently happening.
Thank you so much, Bassem Ali. He's an editor at Ahram Online in Cairo. Moving on to Ethiopia, where Ethiopian and Sudanese leaders have expressed their commitment to a successful end to the ongoing negotiations over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The leaders met during a one-day visit by Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to Khartoum on Tuesday. Abiy and his Sudanese counterpart Abdallah Hamdok discussed the need to reach what they termed as a winning situation for Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt. The Ethiopian leader later met the head of Sudan's ruling council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is being built some 15 kilometers from Ethiopia's border with Sudan. The giant hydropower project has become a major source of discord between Ethiopia on one side and Egypt and Sudan on the other.
Concerning the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the two sides stressed the need to exert all possible efforts to reach a successful end to the tripartite negotiations under the supervision of the African Union in a way that leads to an agreement that guarantees a winning situation for all parties and makes the JAD a tool for regional cooperation among the nearby countries. The two sides expressed their support to the mediation efforts led by the African Union in the JAD negotiations and their commitment to them. They consider this mediation an expression of the principle of African-led solutions to problems in Africa.
Well, let's now move on to West Africa and an ongoing situation in Mali, where talks have hit a deadlock between the military junta in Mali and the West African regional bloc ECOWAS. Meanwhile, continental body the African Union maintains that the military-led government in Mali is unconstitutional and has asked the international community to denounce it. In its capacity as AU chairperson, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said rule of law must return to Mali, with power going back to civilians. From Addis Ababa, where the AU is headquartered, here is CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi.
The African Union has no power to force the military in Mali to relinquish power, but it hopes sanctions it has imposed on Mali will encourage a return to civilian leadership. Mali has been suspended from the membership of the AU, and the West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS has enforced trade-related sanctions as well as closing their borders with Mali. The African Union is also banking on encouraging dialogue and reconciliation among the warring factions in Mali so as to move the country from the current military rule. It will continue using the envoys from the West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS to encourage the military in Mali to follow the constitution and allow elections to be organized to move the power to civilians. Even with the refusal of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to take back his seat, the African Union still cannot recognize military rule in the country. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The African continent has crossed a major health milestone. The World Health Organization has certified Africa free from wild polio. The virus attacks the spinal cord, causing irreversible paralysis in children. Medical experts say immunization campaigns and community outreach programs helped stop the spread of the disease in Africa. So far, only Afghanistan and Pakistan recorded cases of wild polio virus this year. Earlier, we talked to Dr. Pascal Nkanda, the WHO's polio eradication program coordinator for Africa, about the milestone.
Yes, so what has happened today is a very big achievement in terms of being certified wild polio virus free. As you know, this has been the second virus which have been eradicated from Africa after smallpox 40 years ago. So quite a historic achievement what has happened today. We have also prevented 1.8 million children who have been paralyzed because of this drive to eradicate polio.
The WHO polio-free declaration for its African region comes after Nigeria, the last endemic country on the continent, recorded no new cases in 3 years. CGTN's Deji Badmos has more on that story.
35-year-old Esther Makwe is a polio survivor. The Nigerian entrepreneur was infected with the virus at age 2.
People were afraid of coming close to me, and the stigma and it was so much on me that I had to run. Initially, I was like blaming my mom because I asked her a lot of questions, and she told me actually there was a vaccine she missed.
Makop Masok, another polio survivor, has a similar experience. He says his childhood was a very difficult one.
You know, there's what is called the polio trauma that a lot of people don't know. Sometimes in the night you feel pains. Everybody is enjoying his rest. You are just feeling pains in your joints.
Their stories are a reminder of the debilitating effects of poliomyelitis. Less than a decade ago, the country accounted for more than half of global polio cases.
Just think about in 1996, almost 75,000 children were paralyzed in Africa. So now there is no polio case, there is no paralysis due to polio. So this has been a historic pathway. You see how many disability you reversed. And also, we did not count the polio-related mortality, so we saved lives. So you see that has a direct impact to the economy.
Nigeria reported its last case of polio in 2016. The WHO has now certified the country and the continent free of the virus. And for polio survivors like Esther and Makop, this means a lot.
If only this was done earlier, I think I wouldn't have been affected. And I'm very happy that the children I will bring on earth, nothing like polio.
It's even my prayer that it will be sustained, it will be permanent, that no child in Nigeria, Africa, or even the world will be infected with polio any longer.
But experts say much still needs to be done to ensure Africa stays free of the wild polio virus.
Nigeria is having very high number of unimmunized children. So we need to ensure those unimmunized children are immunized through the routine immunization system. And building that system, that also build the backbone for primary healthcare system. And that will be the major challenge ahead of us.
While Africa is celebrating this health milestone, the world is not rid of the wild polio virus yet, as Pakistan and Afghanistan are still battling with the virus. The WHO estimates that the eradication of polio across the world would save at least $40 billion, which can then be diverted to other public health initiatives. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Time for us to take a short break. We'll be back with more news, including concern that the coronavirus may spread in water-stressed rural communities in Kenya, and unrest in U.S. state of Wisconsin after a black man is shot multiple times by police.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, protesters wearing gas masks rallied in the U.S. city of Portland late on Monday. Officers called it a riot after demonstrators ignited the local police association. Another rally 24 hours earlier had turned violent, with some protesters attacking officers. More than 20 people were arrested. Portland has been gripped by demonstrations since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, police custody in May. For more on that story, CGTN's Dan Williams joins us from Kenosha in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. What is the latest from there, and what's Jacob Blake's condition at the moment, Dan?
Yes, so in an interview with a local newspaper here, Jacob Blake's father, Jacob Blake Sr., has said that his son is now paralyzed from the waist down. It's unclear if that's permanent, but saying that he is now paralyzed from the waist down. He is still in intensive care, we're told. Jacob Blake Sr. also going on to say that his son has 8 holes in him and is quoted as saying, "What justified all those shots? What justified that in front of my grandsons?" As far as the investigation is concerned, well, it's very much in the early stages, say investigators. They're calling for patience, as we can say.
Right, St. Louis, Wisconsin. The same thing happened.
As you can see,
a year apart.
People here are very tense about
this is pain, this
what
is suffering.
happened. Sir, we will be with you shortly, and I'd love to talk to you.
Shortly is great. I appreciate you. I don't mean to interrupt, but I do mean to interrupt. Dante Shannon!
Well, Dan, I don't know if you're in a position to answer that. We did see now you being interrupted in that interview, and just as you say, people really angry. But a curfew that had been imposed was due to be lifted this morning. Tell us more about that, Dan.
Yeah, that's right. And again, we obviously are live, and we cannot be 100% sure what will happen. It is very tense here. You can see behind me one of the trucks that has been burnt out. I'm standing in front of the courthouse here in Kenosha. This is where the scenes of the violence, if you like, the protests that have taken place over the last couple of evenings have really been taking place here. You can see that they're boarding up. They're putting in now fencing in front of this courthouse in order to try and protect it. As far as I can see across this road here, for the next couple of blocks, there's a car dealership here that's been completely burnt out, as well as most of the other businesses here all being boarded up indeed as well. But protests here have become violent. There have been clashes between protesters and police. We've seen tear gas being used, rubber bullets being used. I spoke to Clive McIntyre, who is the local Black Lives Matter head of the local chapter here. He said that he was here last night and was shot twice by rubber bullets as well. We'll be catching up with him later on. Things are, as I say, very tense indeed, following, of course, this shooting that took place on Sunday. Jacob Blake being shot multiple times here, and it seems as though he is, according to his father, paralyzed now from the waist down. That being the latest here from Kenosha.
And as you say, Dan, we saw that tension firsthand on air. Thank you so much, Dan Williams, joining us there from Wisconsin. Well, the Kremlin is rejecting Germany's call for an investigation into the sudden illness of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. German doctors say he was poisoned after finding indications of a toxic substance in his body. He was transferred to Berlin over the weekend and remains in a coma. Russian doctors initially rejected poisoning, instead blaming natural causes. A Kremlin spokesperson says the German clinic has not conclusively identified the toxin and that an investigation would be launched if poisoning was definitely established. Meanwhile, China's foreign minister is in Italy, his first stop on his Europe tour. He sat down with his Italian counterpart, Luigi Di Maio, to discuss trade and the coronavirus. Both underscored the importance of cooperation. Beijing said China and Europe both upheld solidarity in beating the pandemic, reviving the world economy, and protecting multilateralism. Wang will be visiting 5 European nations in the coming days. His next stop will be the Netherlands.
China and Italy are both countries with a responsibility for world peace and stability. Thus, we should vigorously defend multilateralism and free trade and maintain a stable global industrial supply chain. Italy will host the G20 next year. China will fully support Italy's work and make positive contributions to moving forward with global governance reforms after the pandemic and achieving an early recovery of the world economy.
Italy has always been a bridge of cooperation between the East and the West. We respect all our allies. This year marks the 59th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries. We will sincerely promote comprehensive cooperation in culture, the economy, and trade. We have a long history of bilateral cooperation, and I believe it will have a bright future.
Well, back to news here on the continent. Across Nigeria, schools have partially reopened ahead of national examinations. Learning institutions have implemented strict safety protocols to reduce the risk of COVID-19 infection. CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam reports.
Wearing of masks, temperature checks and hand washing or sanitizing, all mandatory measures as secondary schools across Nigeria reopened partially. Learning institutions have been forced to close down for over 5 months now due to the coronavirus pandemic. Recently, the government announced only graduating students will return to write their exit examinations. School authorities say they've taken all necessary measures to ensure the safety of students and staff.
Before they resumed, we reached out to their parents. We sent them the requirements. How every child should come with his or her face masks, and then his or her own small bottle of hand sanitizer. And of course, we let them know that we have the items for safety in place.
Even though other students will be here alongside them, but every measures on ground has shown and has made us so confident that our children can come back to school.
While many schools migrated online, poor internet access and electricity supply hampered effective studying, especially in rural areas. Though back in school, students say preparing for their examinations amid the pandemic hasn't been easy.
Emotionally depressing because it tells you, it just creates a very disturbing image that you won't be writing the exam this year and all your hard work and preparation are in vain.
On a normal school day, social interactions between yourself, your teacher and your fellow colleagues is actually a compulsory thing because school is a social environment. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, where social distancing rules have been enforced and proper sanitary personal hygiene is being enforced, before we could, the cooperation between the students and the teacher have been faltering due to the fact we can't approach our teachers beyond a certain limit and communicate effectively as we could.
The majority of Nigeria's students who are not sitting final exams are still stuck at home, and parents are waiting for authorities to announce when classes will resume for these learners. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, access to water is a key part of preventing and controlling infectious diseases. In Kenya, there are concerns that coronavirus may spread in rural communities with water-stressed environments. Daniel Arap Moy reports from Turkana, one of Kenya's driest counties.
Many Kenyans rely on hand washing as one of the cheapest ways to keep the coronavirus at bay. But in the water-scarce county of Turkana, not everyone has access to safe and clean water.
It's been almost 2 years and we still don't have water. For now, we rely on the river. If the water level decreases, we dig through the sand and collect drinking water.
Here in Kawales, we have a very serious water problem ever since our water pipe broke down. It's now like 1.5 years and we still don't have water.
A report last year by UNICEF found that less than 60% of Kenyans have access to basic water services. While regular hand washing may seem like the easiest precautionary measure against the coronavirus pandemic, water can be hard to come by, especially among rural communities in Africa. Despite the challenges, authorities say they are making efforts to ensure rural communities have regular access to clean running water as a measure to protect communities against coronavirus.
We have increased water resources in quite a significant area. I don't want to say that we have solved all the water problems. Those problems are still there, but it's a struggle.
Right now we are a bit lucky because it's raining, so there is water in some areas. But there are these other areas that are persistent and don't have water, so we have to ensure that there is what we call water tracking. So we have some trucks that we fill and then ensure that this water reaches some of the areas.
While some can afford to pay for alternative water supplies to drink, wash and fend against COVID-19, the question is, how about those who cannot? Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Lodwar, Kenya.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more, including wonderful visuals that we have from the Masai Mara. But for now, let's hand over to Rama for the latest in business.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Kenya's mobile phone service provider Safaricom has $5 million to invest in tech startups. And Egypt's housing industry, will it rebound after the economic damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Let's start in East Africa. The Kenyan telecommunications giant Safaricom plans to invest around $5 million in local tech startups in the country. Now, these investments will be made through the firm's Spark Fund, which focuses on late seed and early growth stage ventures, specifically in education, healthcare and agriculture. However, the fund is open to investing in startups in other categories as long as the firms complement Safaricom's product offering. On to North Africa, Egypt's property market may be set for a rebound after a major slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The real estate market has been booming until the COVID-19 pandemic hit the North African state and severely limited movement and trade. CGTN's Yasser Hakim examines how the industry has been affected and what may lie ahead.
It's not surprising that the real estate market has suffered from the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. Developers have seen an average 50 to 70% drop in revenue and sales. The sector went into complete standstill for the month of April before Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi intervened and gave the industry special attention because it's labor-intensive. He pumped financial aid to construction companies, and it was the first sector to resume work during the lockdown. And now there are signs the sector is growing.
Yes, there are positive signs of a rebound. COVID-19 has weakened in Egypt lately and infection cases have dropped drastically. So, the fear of taking a decision to buy a unit is slowly diminishing. Secondly, the majority of the population is low and medium income earners. They are being given unprecedented favorable payment facilities. You pay 30% of the price after you receive your apartment, and the rest is spread over 15 years at low interest rates. This has encouraged more people to consider buying a unit.
El Assel says clients that are pushing sales up are two types. First are the ones in urgent need of a housing unit, and it's mainly the small apartments. And second are the financially able clients who buy luxurious houses. This early rebound has created a feeling of optimism among developers, but some constructors believe the market will never be the same post-COVID.
The concept of supply and demand has changed in the real estate in Egypt since COVID-19 and will stay this way. We are undertaking new research studies to determine how the market is unfolding. Clients are no longer steadfast in buying because their income has been affected during the pandemic and will continue for the medium term at least. So yes, the market has changed.
Despite the positive outlook, the construction sector is still a long way off from shrugging the adverse effects caused by the pandemic. But if it can sustain itself till the end of the year, then projections show the real estate market will take off in 2021. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Onto the world of tech. TikTok is suing the Trump administration over an executive order that essentially bans any American transactions with its parent company, ByteDance. Now, in the federal suit that was filed on Monday in California, TikTok says that the app does not pose a national security threat, and it describes the ban levied against it as unfair and illegal.
The popular video app TikTok has officially filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the executive orders issued by President Donald Trump earlier this month. He'd used his emergency economic powers to issue an initial order that bans the app from doing transactions in the country within 45 days, a move that could essentially take away much of the advertising revenue generated here in the U.S. And a second executive order gave ByteDance internet company 90 days to divest from its American assets and any data that TikTok had gathered in the U.S. Analysts say TikTok's challenging the first order on commercial grounds.
My understanding, the first, which is what a lot of the court attention is about today, can actually be appealed in court, and that's what TikTok is doing, what ByteDance is doing, to perhaps buy a little bit of time or delay and perhaps preserve some value in the sale. The second, though, I don't believe can be challenged. So they're both quite serious to experience, basically, but they're both different.
President Donald Trump has repeatedly argued that the app poses a national security threat because of its Chinese ties. But TikTok has said that it had taken extraordinary measures to protect user privacy and data by storing all of its data outside of China on servers here in the United States and Singapore. They also argued that the Trump administration had failed to follow due process, provide any evidence that TikTok was an actual threat, nor justification for its punitive actions. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has also issued a response.
China supports the relevant companies in taking up legal weapons to safeguard their rights and interests, and will continue to take all necessary measures to resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
Analysts are saying that it's not very usual to see emergency economic powers to be used against a technology giant. And some are saying this may have been influenced by political motivations given how much Trump has escalated the political rhetoric against China during his re-election campaign. It is Tian Shan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
On to Mexico now. The vast majority of persons who've died from COVID-19 over there have diabetes, hypertension or obesity as a pre-existing condition. In order to help reduce those health problems, one Mexican state has banned the sale of junk food to minors. Now, the states are also preparing to pass similar legislation. CGTN's Frank Contreras reports from Mexico City.
Throughout Mexico, small neighborhood stores like this one, called the Red Star, are familiar sights. Their best-selling items are usually things like potato and corn chips, packaged pastries and other snacks, sugary soft drinks, and a wide array of candies made in Mexico and imported from abroad. For more than 30 years, Juan Aquino and his sister Carmelita have been operating stores like this. He knows that his home state of Oaxaca recently banned junk food sales to children. Now, Mexico City may do the same.
I believe it will affect me because if I do not sell potato chips, we'd have little, if any, income. But in the larger picture, I think it's better for the country because children have been eating lots of junk food.
In Oaxaca, kids under the age of 18 are not allowed to purchase chips, sugary drinks, or candies. They can only buy such merchandise if accompanied by a parent. But in Mexico, junk food, which is high in calories from sugar or fat, is everywhere, and it comes in all flavors and sizes. This fried pork skin, called a chicharrón, is a best-seller in this market. Mexico is among the countries with the highest number of cases of childhood and adult obesity. Citizens are becoming increasingly aware that their nation has a problem.
The outbreak of the coronavirus has given families a chance to pause and think about how they're feeding their children. Analysts say that's what's bringing about the changes in state laws regarding junk food sales.
What has triggered this change in conscience in the population is the pandemic, and when they see that 80% of the people who are dying have diabetes, hypertension, or they are overweight.
At least 10 other states across Mexico and the nation's capital are exploring legislation that would ban junk food sales to minors. The legislative efforts are nonpartisan and come from all major Mexican political parties. One state is even planning to ban advertising of such items. Frank Contreras, CGTN, Mexico City.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back with more business news at the top of the hour. We'll see you at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you, Rama. We'll see you then. And as promised, here's what's coming up from the Masai Mara after this short break. We get up close with some of the big 5 game animals at the Mara in our digital safari.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Tanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
And now to our continued look at the wildebeest migration. And today we get up close with some of the big 5 game animals in Kenya's Masai Mara and South Africa's Juma Game Reserve.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, on a cold and breezy morning in the Masai Mara, an assortment of nearby animals were making their way down to the river. Although leisurely in their stroll down to the water's edge, the prospect of crossing largely loomed in their minds. Down in Pinda, the big cats were still waking up from their peaceful sleep. Warming their bodies in the morning sun and getting ready for the day's activities. A large white rhino bull was out patrolling his territory, with his tail curled up and his eyes fixed on the horizon. This rhino meant business. The elephants in Pridelands took full advantage of finding a waterhole all to themselves. Mud bathing, splashing and drinking. Their playful demeanor was on full display. The hefty herbivores were out and about all over the southern African parks. Steve got up close and personal with a large herd of buffalo in Juma. These aggressive bulldozers seemed tranquil amongst their companions in the bush. We joined Dylan in Swalu as he came upon an African wildcat patiently stalking its breakfast. Despite spending most of the morning waiting for the cat to strike, our hopes did not materialize as the unlucky cat skulked away without reward. Later that morning, the mounting pressure to cross the mighty Mara almost reached boiling point. A herd of zebra contemplated crossing the dangerous waterway. But after reassessing the situation, they thought perhaps tomorrow would be more sensible. Join us every day at 4:30 GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
Some sporting action coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Organizers hoping to grow rugby's profile and fan base in Tanzania.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for what's happening in the world of sport. Let's begin in Tanzania, where club rugby swung into action when the Dar Leopards crushed the Arusha Rhinos 45-5 in Dar es Salaam over the weekend. Both sides took part in a one-off rugby tournament, pitting the country's biggest sides against each other. The Leopards were in dominant form throughout the final encounter, punishing their opponents on their way to victory. Rugby in Tanzania enjoys a limited status, but continues to grow its profile. Organizers say the tournament, which drew to a close on Sunday, is aimed at growing support for the game in Tanzania.
It's only a shame that there is only one or two other clubs in Tanzania. There's a team in Tanga, there's a team in Arusha, but that's about it. So a lot of the time we're forced to go up to Kenya to play matches. So we're trying to again, encourage development here so we can get more people involved.
A lot of players couldn't come, so we had a bit of a mishmash team, not necessarily our experienced players. But what was great is we had a lot of youth players. We had a lot of guys from our development rugby program who had a chance to really step up today and play against senior rugby for the first time. A lot of them have come from under 18s, and so now they're up against the big players.
Meanwhile, Tanzania was the first African country to resume post-COVID-19 football, with Simba SC winning the league and cup double. The country managed to conclude the disrupted 2019-2020 season despite the East African region registering increasing cases of the coronavirus. Isaac Lukanda reports.
On the 2nd of August, Tanzanian giants Simba Sports Club celebrated clinching a domestic double. At the time, many countries in Africa were still under lockdown and other COVID-19 restrictions.
The country's leaders said no. This is a problem that is perhaps rooted in perception, that life can continue as we combat this disease, just as we combat other diseases we live with. So it was not an easy decision, and you will note that when we started, people were a bit fearful of going to stadiums, despite the social distancing measures that were put in place.
The government announced that leagues in the country would resume on the 1st of June following its claim of a significant reduction in coronavirus cases. Players and fans were subjected to strict guidelines and safety regulations during matches. Saving the income of footballers was one of the main reasons given for the resumption.
The United Nations estimates that millions of jobs could be lost from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the sporting industry. To cushion its members from the adverse effects of COVID-19, the World Football Governing Body FIFA has granted $1 million each to football federations around the world, including those in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya.
Citing the possibility of a resurgence of coronavirus cases, some critics in and outside the country denounced Tanzania's move to resume the league as reckless, but many fans welcomed the decision.
I was worried. How could we be the first to reopen? But when it resumed and things went well, our league became one of our identities. Our country has been recognized through this.
The guidelines put in place were good. As fans, we would sit 1 meter apart, so I was happy about that, and the number of fans in attendance was also reduced.
As the Tanzanian Premier League prepares to enter yet another season, its experience of resuming football amidst the COVID-19 pandemic may just offer a roadmap to other nations seeking to resume their leagues. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The European football